living in West Ealing at the time with mum, and I remember writing on this piece of paper, "I hate my life, I just want to die." And I remember writing that like in a notepad, and I must have written it 100 times. It was mum was sick, but after a while you become curious as a child. You become, what is this, like, I've never known anyone else to be sick for that long. Where is mum?
Is it okay now?
2.5 years ago, she had about 35 charges. Again, my mum, if you were to meet her, is one of the kindest, most, she'd be like, "Dan, do you want a cup of tea?" She's so quiet and calm and kind of meek in a way, I guess. But when she goes into this hyper mode, or she goes into the manic state, it's like two different people. Her lead clinician saying, he said, "You're either going to end up dead or in prison." And he said, "It's up to you to decide which one." And she needed that reality check. The 3 points of psychology were initially to treat mental illness, to support the ordinary day people, so in today, and to study geniuses. That was what psychology was set up to do. But after World War II, it all shifted completely. And because there was so much trauma from the war, all of psychology's efforts moved towards the deficit model, treating trauma. What we need to be doing is trying to...
Could you do me a massive favour and click follow or subscribe button? It helps the podcast out so much. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Make It Sane podcast. I'm joined by Danny, Rahim, and we met at a speaking event a few months ago now. I don't think we can discuss it just yet of what the event was, but we just kind of clicked straight away. So it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Could you do like a little introduction to yourself and the listeners if you've not come across yourself before?
So hello everyone, I'm Danny Rahim and I am an actor. I'm a mental health advocate, ambassador. It's covered many names over the years, but definitely passionate about mental health, and also an actor, speaker, mental health trainer, consultant, etc., etc. So many hats over the years. Yeah,
and honestly, it's a pleasure to have you on because I think guys, and obviously you speak very openly about your mental health, and it's something I've been doing more now, and obviously it's great to have other males kind of speak very openly about it and quite vulnerable as well, you know what I mean? Because it's only recent my friends now kind of like speak up about it. What was like your kind of, if we go back to your kind of like childhood, what was your childhood like growing up? Like?
So I guess I had what would be described as a fairly normal upbringing for the formative years anyway. So I had mum, dad. I grew up in a council estate in West London, working class family. And up until, I guess, the age of maybe 5, 6, mum, dad were together. It was just a fairly normal existence. Yeah. But after that, mum had a car accident and her mental health really deteriorated. And I think that was the real introduction to the word, to the concept, because you'd hear very loosely these terms, particularly from medical practitioners, or echoes through my uncle might say something in a conversation.
Did you know what you mean at that age? Because it was very like taboo to me, even like...
No, I mean, so what we were told was that mum was sick. So that was how it was. And we were very young, so they weren't going to go into complex diagnosis then, but it was mum was sick. But after a while, you become curious as a child. You become, what is this? Like, I've never known anyone else to be sick for that long. Where is mum? Sometimes she was sectioned, sometimes she was away for and to have this mood that would oscillate so much. She was diagnosed with bipolar, manic depression, then bipolar disorder. So it's taken various names over the years. And it was only later on that curiosity kind of led me to what was actually going on with mum at the time. But back then when I was a kid, it was just mum's sick, you're going to go and stay with gran. And that would happen quite regularly. And so that became my normality, really. It was, mum gets unwell, mum becomes unwell, you go and stay with gran. And I sort of spent a lot of time between living with mum and my gran at that point as well.
Was you very kind of back and forward then?
Yeah.
Were you unsettled, or was it just felt normal at the time?
Do you know, now that I'm able to reflect on it, what it was mum really did her best, but when mental ill health sort of took over a lot of her life, it was a very turbulent household and very tumultuous. It was sometimes very chaotic and then sometimes very loving, and that became the norm. And I think what was nice about that I can appreciate at the time, not the chaos of that, but that I was then sent to live with my gran, who was very loving and warm and stable. And I'm not sure about everybody's grandma, but my grandma was kind of the stereotypical, you know, if I woke up in the morning and said, Gran, I'm sick, she'd be like, oh, stay in bed.
Don't go to school.
You can't go to school. Do you want something to eat? And I think I was very fortunate to have that balance of at home, some of that chaos was complemented by the love and affection that hopefully most children do get in that nurturing phase. So in some ways, I'm very grateful that I did have that little bit of balance. What I was probably lacking was the real structure and the paternal figure. My mum and dad then split up when all of this happened. So it was myself, my mum and my sister at the time, which became two sisters. But yeah, I took on
they're the same age as sisters, are they older?
No, so Sky is, I think I'm going to get in trouble for this now, but she's probably around 30. She's 30, 31. Yeah. And Paige is 21, 22. So there's a bit of a gap between them. But in those years, I remember having a lot of time with Sky. We grew up, I'm 37, so she's 31, 32. So there wasn't too much of a gap there. But there was enough that I was sort of the older brother that had to look after her and protect her from what was going on from a very young age. So yeah, those were the early years. And I think then when we got to the point of high school, so what are you then? You're around 11? Is it 11 years old?
Yeah, it's like 11 or 12 when you kind of start,
And that was sort of a big transition for me. So when I was in primary school, social services were involved because mum was very up and down. They were. Can
we talk a bit about obviously the bipolar and what that was and how it kind of affected your mum? And I really wanted to ask as well, like before the bipolar, like the mental illness, did she have any issues prior to that? Not really.
When I described the normal mum, and I use that in quotation marks because everybody's experience is subjective, right? When you're talking about family dynamics. But mum would go to work, dad wasn't around, but that was fine. Mum went to work, she provided for us, she had a normal job, 9 to 5 or whatever it was in those days. We would go to school, we'd come back and we'd have dinner with mum, playing out in the car park, playing football with friends. It was all that kind of stuff. After school club we would go to. So mum, as a sole parent, she provided, she did what she needed to. So there was, that's when I say, even though it was mum was by herself at some points, I still see that as many people share that similar experience of having a sole parent. And so I never looked at that as I was particularly at a loss for anything, but certainly when the mental ill health and the diagnosis came in, then things really did.
Was your dad around a lot? Do you have a close relationship with
your dad? So dad actually passed away in, I think it was around 2011, 2010. And I wasn't very close with him, to be honest. I was much closer with my Irish family. So I'm half Pakistani, half Irish. Mum's side of the family are Pakistani, dad's side, but not traditional in the way we might sometimes think. Mum was born here and had a very westernized upbringing.
Okay.
And dad was born in Northern Ireland, in a place called Bangor near Belfast. And I spent a lot of time when I was younger going over. So when dad wasn't around, I would go to Ireland and spend time with my family over there. So there are lots of pictures of me as a kid going and seeing my grandparents. And I know throughout his various challenges, he had some personal challenges whilst he was growing up and through his teens and adulthood. And from what I recall, there was some problems with alcohol and some issues that he had to deal with himself. But so I would go and see the family, but at times my grandparents on that side were disconnected with my dad as well. So it was like he kind of went as this lone ranger.
Disconnect,
there was a bit of a disconnect. So I'm actually still very close with my Irish family. I'm going to go over and see them next month, and it's not as frequent as it once was, but they're still very much there as a support infrastructure. So what was the question?
It's kind of like your relationship with your dad.
Relationship with dad.
Because I've heard, I think on previous podcasts, like I hear a lot about your mum, which we'll kind of, we've kind of touched upon, but we'll kind of delve into. But I just wondered, like, obviously on previous podcasts, I didn't really hear much about your dad. So I just thought whether he was like kind of still.
Whether he was there or what was, and it's a good observation. I think he's talked about less because I had less of a relationship with him, to be honest. I remember my one memory of him probably is turning up to a 10th or 11th year old birthday, and he turned up in a big pink bunny suit, and I think he was on a stag do.
Yeah.
And I do remember my mum saying, look, it's, you haven't been around for such a long time, and you're turning up, and I'm never going to stop you seeing Danny, your son, but be mindful of the impact that it might have on him, that you're just gone and then you just turn up, and I can't remember if he was drunk, he had a few beers, whatever, I don't know. But and I think after that, I didn't really speak to him for a long time. In fact, I didn't speak to him. And then what happened is I left drama school, and I very quickly, one of my earliest jobs, I got a job in EastEnders. I was in EastEnders for a little bit.
Yeah.
And they all saw me in that. My family saw me in that. And, I was up at university, so I hadn't been speaking to them as much. And what happened is, what my uncle has told me is that Dad, very unexpectedly, he went into a coma. He had a motorcycle accident when he was younger. And he had this clot in his leg. And what happened is gradually that got worse over time to a point
just like completely unaware.
He wasn't really unaware, but he was also, from what I've been told, he was like, people are like, or his partner at the time would be like, you need to go to the doctor. And he'd be like, no, it's fine, just leave it.
It's like generation as well, like, where they're just like, we don't need to, like, it'd be fine.
Yeah, there's people far worse off than I am. Like, I don't want to waste the doctor's time. He was quite, from what I've heard. And what then happened is his leg sort of went purple. This clot expanded relatively quickly all up his leg, and the doctors basically, he went into a coma, and the doctors basically said to my granddad and to my uncle, you've got to make a decision. We need to either amputate his leg or prescribe him a really strong course of antibiotics that he might not make it through. Yeah. So I guess it was my uncle and my granddad that made the decision to say, look, if Paul, my dad, wakes up and he's got no leg, I'm sure, and I'm pretty sure actually from what I've heard of him, he would have gone, let's go antibiotics and see what we can do. And unfortunately he didn't make it through. But what I'd heard before that is that he had been wanting to reach out and get back in contact, but because he had seen me in that show, he thought to himself, I haven't been in touch with him for so long. Now he's on this TV show, and I'm going to reach out and say, hey, it's your dad. I'm here again. Yeah. Obviously, he didn't expect anything of all the coma and the blood clot and all of that happened. So that's what I was told by my uncle, and that's the story I guess I've chosen to keep. And I did go to his funeral, and I think what was quite strange was looking in this casket of someone that's passed away that is my dad, and thinking, do you know what, I'll never be able to have a beer with that person, or I'll never be able to. I
was going to ask, was there any moments, like, obviously when you found out that, you was like, I wish I had more time to, like, maybe ask him questions or kind of get to know him?
The first thing that happened is Mum's mental health deteriorated again, because even though they weren't very close, I guess, at the time, it's still someone that you've had a child with, and there was a big impact on her as to him passing away. They had a history, there was love there was all the things that they shared, and so actually I was put quite quickly onto supporting her as the byproduct of him passing. So I didn't get a lot of time to reflect on what that meant to me. It was more making sure Mum was okay.
And I think that's something from kind of reading about yourself and listening to you on the podcast, is you took on a lot at a very young age as well with your mum and kind of looking after her. I mean, how was that from a very kind of 13-year-old boy, like kind of going through school, but also having kind of the pressures of making sure that his mum's okay and that she's fine?
Yeah, I think it was what I knew, that there was, although
it felt normal in some ways.
It felt normal in some ways. And I grew up, first of all, on South Acton Estate, then Green Dragon, which is in Brentford. And there were a lot of kids in those environments, my friends, that had similar, if not worse, situations. So I would always think of myself, I'm quite lucky actually in this situation. there was lots of guns, drugs. Not that we were, but that was the scene on the estates at the time. So I thought that I was quite lucky to have the loving grandma that I could just go back to, and mum was around when she was able to be around, and so I guess I just framed it at that point as I'm actually quite lucky in many ways, and it was a big bit of responsibility, but I jumped onto it because that was sort of all I knew. It was which way are you going to go? Are you going to crumble, or are you going to just try and prosper and make something of this? So that was the path I chose. Yeah,
obviously at a very kind of young age, obviously kind of like looking after your mum.
Mm-hmm.
When you kind of got to your teens and kind of like high school, did it get a bit easier then? How was your mum's kind of mental health at that point?
So it didn't get easier, I don't think. In fact, it possibly got worse. But because then my younger sister, I was able to go and live with my gran, but my younger sister had to go. She was put into care. So that had challenges in itself because she was so young, and mum's health and some of her actions were deemed high risk to my sister. So never harm to Sky, but the things that mum was doing. And
was it kind of like the language and like the bipolar? I mean, was it just like swearing, or was it just kind of aggression, or was it just everything?
So mindful of how you're going to caveat this, but there was multiple suicide attempts. So that's not very good in an environment with a child. Police coming and knocking the door, ambulances coming knocking at the door at 3 a.m. because she's done something, and then called them, and then we're in the house. That's not the environment really that's psychologically safe for a child. So as a result of that, Sky was taken into care of the local council, I guess. So I wouldn't say I grew up really fast. I had to grow up really fast, and
imagine someone in them circumstances. I can't imagine like kind of your kind of upbringing when you're younger and kind of taking on that responsibility. At such a young age.
I think who was a big lifeline, and I have to give credit, was my first girlfriend, Rachel, and we're still friends today. And her family was so kind to me, and they became, her and her family, and they gave me this semblance of normality, and I spent a lot of time with them. And I just remember there was always like a plate of food for me, or Rachel would share hers with me. And I think that meant a lot, because where I had chaos on one side, I had Gran with the love, and I had my partner. So it was about that support infrastructure that really held me and I guess helped me to get through it all.
Get through all that.
For sure.
Like, when did you first kind of experience like your mental health? Was that a young age then, would you say? So
I wasn't particularly aware of my mental health. I wasn't focusing on it. I certainly wasn't aware of any deterioration. That came sort of later because it was just keep calm and carry on. And
would you say it's like keeping your head above the water in some ways?
Yeah, I was, it was just, I found this new, I just had to drive forward. You either turn back and you allow it to defeat you and you get broken by it. I mean, I remember a time when I was I was living in West Ealing at the time with mum, and I remember writing on this piece of paper, I hate my life, I just want to die. And I remember writing that like in a notepad, and I must have written it 100 times. Yeah, wow. And
do you remember that moment when you did write that?
Yeah, I do actually. It's one of my only memories. It's one of my few memories of that place. And what was quite strange was about 5 or 6 years ago, mum moved, and I had put this thing under a mattress or something, and we found it, and we didn't know it was there.
Wow! So all the years later,
I have to say that I do have a very kind and loving uncle who sort of stepped in as the paternal figure for me, and he really helped me out. But nevertheless, in those moments where, police and ambulance are coming and knocking on the doors. I got school the next day, where mum's coming in at 4 a.m. hoovering, and I'm like, Mum, what are you doing? I got school. And she's like, effing and blinding, and she's telling me to shut up and it's none of my business. And I remember then it took on a layer. She started to really hoard, and the house became very full. And I remember going in my room one day, and I opened it, and there was a sofa behind my door because the whole house was so full. I couldn't open. I had to like kind of climb in, and just wasn't a great environment. But again, it's just what it was, you know. I remember coming in one day, and Mum had in lipstick written all over the wall all of this. It was like she was losing her mind in some ways, and going through maybe a small bit of psychosis and imagining things and seeing things and writing with lipstick all over. Imagine coming in here one day and there's just covered in lipstick, and as a child you're like, what is, and you're trying to read it all,
so
and
every day it's just like a different story.
It was so unpredictable, and it was so psychologically unsafe, but I knew in my heart of hearts that she didn't mean it. I knew that it wasn't her fault. It was some kind of illness that was.
And this all came down to the car accident. That was the tipping point.
That was the trigger, yeah. So she had a car accident.
Isn't it mad though? Like one incident could potentially change your life forever.
100%.
And I had Shocker on, and he got sectioned, and he was just saying everyone's just one thought away from that tipping point.
One action, one event. Now, as I track back now, and we have tracked back, and obviously I'm doing the work that I do now, so I'm very psychology and going back and understanding the mind. There were lots of trauma that my mum experienced when she was growing up with my gran, who was fairly traditional. My mum is brought up here in a Western environment. My gran wanted her to have an arranged marriage. Obviously, mum didn't want that. So she went through she experienced her own trauma. But I guess for her, she just, in fact, we could even track back a little bit. My grandma moved to the UK with her husband, my grandfather, and he was working, I think, for Network Rail. They had 2 kids or 3 kids. That was my mum and my uncles. And he had this very mysterious death at work. No one still knows to this day what happened to him. But he was the provider. He got the job over here. He was very intelligent, and he came over from Pakistan. So she was here. Her husband passed away. This is my grandma. Yeah. She had 3 kids. She could barely speak any English. So then my uncles and my mum all get taken into care because she had a breakdown. Oh, wow. So when you track it back, mental ill health has sort of run in the family a little bit. And I'm very curious as to the nature nurture component of all of that. But so she had her own trauma, and she found her way through. She got herself a job. She had her kids, and she was just cracking on, like doing what she needed to do to provide for her family. So there's no doubt in my mind that there were probably some bits of that, but that she was managing and that she was coping with or dealing with or not getting overwhelmed. But when she had her car accident and she lost her baby, that trigger probably brought up a lot of old stuff. So yes, it was it's
probably obviously out of a job as well. So you just left with your thoughts, aren't you?
Really? And I think her mental health really deteriorated at that point.
Was it quite fast? Did it happen overnight, or was it?
No. So there was.
Did she recover first, and then it kind of?
There were questions about PTSD. Is it so? She's had a traumatic event. What is this? There are certain diagnoses, for example, emotionally unstable personality disorder, which she has been diagnosed with, but they take a long time to measure. Like it can be 3, 4 years before you get that diagnosis. Yeah. Whereas if you go and see, if it's depression, you can go and see your GP, and it's usually 2 weeks for a clinical diagnosis. They'll say, watch your mood over a couple of weeks, come and report back. Yeah. And that's where you may get the diagnosis. But for more complex diagnosis, it can take years. And so what was then depression, was then manic depression, was then, it took so many names over the years. But the bottom line was she was not very well, and she was really struggling with her mental health. But again, the coping mechanisms at the time, there was then medication, she was sectioned a few times. There were all these ways of trying, I guess, for people to support her in this, but none of them were really particularly effective.
Did she have much family? I know you mentioned your uncle was there for yourself. Like, do you come from a big family yourself?
So I've got 3 uncles. I've got 3 uncles and mum. So mum has 3 siblings. Very close to one of my uncles, not so much with the others. They're all sort of off doing their own things. But yeah.
He was quite an important part of your life, weren't he? When
my
you was
uncle,
younger,
certainly, yeah. And I think what happened is through the phases and the years of mum's mental ill health, the family were all there at the beginning for support. But when she became very unwell, she became very abusive. And she'd be calling people up on their landlines at 4 a.m, shouting abuse to them. My family have kids, or my uncles have children. And so gradually the disengagement happened because it was too much.
Too much, yeah.
And what happened was, before my sister went into care, my uncle offered to take her. He said, look, we are family and, you know, we're not going to send our own family into care. But mum's behavior was so erratic and so destructive that she would be calling my auntie up and saying to her, she's not your effing kid and I don't want you to. And what my auntie had to make a decision was she had 2 kids of her own.
Yeah.
And actually it would be fine to bring our family in and have her there. But what she couldn't have was this kind of self-destructive or individual, my mum coming in and causing all of that chaos for her children.
Yeah.
So I completely understood that. That made sense, and they were willing and prepared to. But in the end, it was like,
it must be hard because it brings like a bit of divide, I imagine, in the family and stuff. I mean, is it okay now on both sides?
I think people have realised mum to has done so well in the past couple of years. I mean, 2.5 years ago, she had about 35 charges again. My mum, if you were to meet her, is one of the kindest, most, she'd be like, Dan, do you want a cup of tea? She's so quiet and calm and kind of meek in a way, I guess. But when she goes into this hyper mode, or she goes into the manic state, it's like 2 different people. It really is. And some people don't even identify her as the same person. But I think the family have now come to realize she's really trying hard. And she has had a little slip at the moment, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a bit. But I think they realise she's doing her best, and she had 35 outstanding charges against her. I mean, at one point she was, this was during the pandemic. She took all her clothes and she was walking across train tracks. That's the extent of what it was. And so then she had to be sectioned, and then actually she went to prison for that, because during the pandemic, what they said is, you're now not only endangering yourself, you're endangering other people. If the train had to skid and people got injured, you're now putting other people at risk. So they had to
go to prison for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't
even if someone's in not the right frame of mind when they did it.
It was, yeah. And there are different places that you go. So my understanding, it wasn't like, as we see, like Orange is the New Black. That she's not in general population. She's in a medical ward of the prison, but that she could not be released. She could not just leave herself, because when she did, she became a risk to the general public. And we totally understood that. We accepted that. And I think that was a big reality check for her after that. When she came out, she was like, I've got a choice of I remember going to see, sorry, I'm jumping around here because little bits are reminding myself. I remember going to Ealing Hospital and meeting her lead clinician, going to this ward, and you have something like, it's like a ward round where everybody that's involved in your mum's care is there. And I had to go there to be her person, her next of kin. And I do remember her lead clinician saying, there's 2 things that are going to happen as a result of this behavior if it continues. And this was an expert that had dealt with this for many, many years in different patients. And he said, you're either going to end up dead or in prison. And he said, it's up to you to decide which one. And I was quite shocked. I was like, he's being very direct with her, but he was right. And she needed that reality check. And subsequently, she did end up in prison to some degree. And she came out, and there were so many charges outstanding. So she left the medical ward, wherever she was being held. And then there was all this legal stuff would happen. So she'd have all of her medication regulated, and she'd come out in this very calm state again. And then what would happen is she'd have 30 charges outstanding against her. And so, of course, that would then cause her anxiety and stress and then lift her up. So she was in this perpetual cycle.
Was she taking the medication when she got back into like reality, or back into?
She's been on medication for she's been on a continuous morphine patch, or replacing these morphine patches since the car crash. So that long. So she's having morphine, she's having antidepressant. I think at one point she was taking 14 to 16 tablets a day. So mood levelers, stabilizers, antidepressant, whatever all these things were. It was like a cocktail, and it was a lot.
That must be a mad book, because it can't be good for taking that. I mean, some people obviously, I don't know, like some people need medication and it helps, but imagine.
Yeah, I mean,
it must be.
And they you know, her GPs have always been fantastic. I got a great relationship with them. They were our family GPs, and they always try their best for her. But to refine the medication is such an art into what someone needs. And so to finish that little bit of the story, she came out with these 30 charges, and I then wrote this letter to the solicitors to just say to her, which then went to court. And I said, look, mum is working so hard. She's had a lot of trauma in her life. You know, she doesn't mean some of the things she does and says. And the judge ruled and just dropped all the charges and said, you've had a really tough life, Malika, and we want to support you, but like, do your best to try and stay out of trouble now. And that really struck her, like the compassion from that judge, you know, our empathy, trying to support her and really not judging her for everything that she had experienced. And that was one of the first stages that the rehabilitation really came into effect. And so for nearly a year and a half, 2 years, she's been fantastic. And only 2-3 weeks ago, she's had a bit of a slip again. And that's how we describe it, as a slip. Her birthday was coming up on the Friday, and she didn't want to be in bed. She spent a lot of time, you know, at home, not feeling very confident to go out. She'd like, you know, order food in and, you know, go to the bathroom and come back, but not going out and really. And she said, you know, I want to be mum for my birthday. I want to take you all out for dinner and you know, and she put a lot of pressure on herself. And so she begged her psychiatrist to just up her dosage just marginally, just so that she could have the energy to function and get up. And unfortunately, that small adjustment just tipped her. And she spent she spent the week before her birthday. I know when it's coming now, because the text messages I'm getting calls and texts 8 or 9 a day. I'm getting a call at 2-3 in the morning.
So you know when something's up.
I can feel it coming, and I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. And what that culminated in, which, you know, is the tragedy, but the truth is, she tried to set fire to the house. And this was 2 weeks ago.
Jesus.
It was a small fire.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't, but I got sent this video from my sister, and it was like 6 police cars, 2 fire engines, and I'm thinking,
what has gone on?
It's just wild. It's wild. And I was actually at my friend's house at the time in North London, where we are now, and you know, I was sitting having some food, and I said, "Oh, mum's tried to set fire to the house." And he was like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "That's not normal." But I've become so desensitized to that stuff.
I can imagine. When you've heard all these like experiences and what you've been through, you probably like, oh, it's just another thing.
And I was just like, wow, look how many, you know, police and that are called there. And I don't like to use the term a cry for help, but I don't think she really was trying to set fire to the house. But she needed some support. The police and ambulance had been one.
She did it for like attention, you know, when someone's like really, really struggling and that they need that attention, so they do something really drastic. Yeah,
the attention theory is like is kind of is the way to look at it. Is not for attention. Is she needed support. She needed support.
Well, it means the attention to get this. Essentially.
And she needed some support, and you know, she still had her clinicians and her nurse. She still had people around her, but that was where she was going into that manic state. She was too hyper-aroused. It was too much, and you know, it's not anyone's job to be sat with her 24/7. That's no one's job to be doing that. I mean, my sister is staying with her at the moment, but even that's a lot for my sister that's currently at university. You know, waking up and the smoke alarms going, it's a lot. You know?
Take it on.
And so she was sectioned to 3 weeks ago now. She will finish off the last probably week of her 28-day section. And you know, my sister sent me a video a couple of days ago, and she's just like, "Hi Dan, sorry about what happened," you know, and we're like, "Look, there's no judgment. It's okay. You're not well, and we can't wait to see you, and we will have that belated birthday dinner together when you're back out." I've learned a lot in all my study and the journey that I've been on is compassion, empathic understanding. Those things get the best results, not judgment, not berating someone, not blaming someone, not shaming someone. They don't get the results. That doesn't affect positive change.
Yeah.
So that's her journey, and as a family, what's been really nice about this situation is the girls, my sisters, have stepped in and sort of shared a little bit of that responsibility, whereas 5-10 years ago it was all on me, and it was a lot. And now we have...
It's quite nice to kind of share it out rather than it all going on kind of like one person. Because I imagine, it's a lot to kind of...
Yeah, well, we created that triangle of support. So I tend to deal with a lot of the clinicians and the emails and the more, I guess, high level stuff. And my sisters are there to take clothes to the hospital to make sure she's okay, she's got food. So we found a really nice way of working and supporting each other so that it's not all on one person. Yeah. And I think that was really important.
No, that's incredible. I kind of wanted to touch upon, obviously, like your kind of career and obviously acting, and we'll kind of get into like the life coaching, because I feel like everything happens for a reason, and everything you've gone through now probably kind of plays a massive part in obviously your life coaching. How did you get into acting? Was that from a young age?
Yeah, so the acting came. It was actually quite a funny one that I was in high school. And there was a phase at high school where I was literally coming in. This is, I guess, a bit of a rebellious phase. I was coming in. I was using I had a free school meal card, which I had £1.50 on every day, which got me a pizza and chips or something of the sort. So I would come in, I'd have my lunch, I'd play football, and I'd leave. This was my GCSE year. But I had no... Gran not telling me what to do. I had no one saying to me, you must.
That kind of like role model to kind of put you in the right direction, essentially.
So I'd just go back to another mate's, play Mario Kart all day, whatever it was. But, and I had a teacher, Mr. Boddington, and he became a bit of a mentor. He really believed in me. And I think it was either the football team, but there was some kind of sporting thing. And I remember him saying to me, we're not going to let you in the football team unless you do something out of your comfort zone that applies yourself in school. So the two choice, I think it was like, learn an instrument, go to drama class, do something that keeps me on the straight and narrow in grounded, school. Kind of grounded, exactly, yeah.
You kind of touched upon the teacher then, Mr. Boddington. Was he like the first person to believe in you? Because I've had that before where, for me, it was a person in college called John Pritchard. He was like the first person to like really believe in me and the person. He had a massive like influence on my life.
And you don't forget him, do you?
On my career now, honestly, it's just down to him having that kind of like self-belief. Would you say that was the first person to kind of believe in yourself?
Yeah, I think there were definitely teachers that helped me along the way, but he was very significant. And I think the reason he was significant was because when this education maintenance allowance, which was 30 quid a week, if you had full attendance for the week, you get 30 quid. And that meant a lot to me at that point, because I was living with my gran. I was kind of supporting her with food, and I hadn't been coming in, and he knew that. And he just said, Danny, you can't get this thing. And I said, look, I know I should have been in. Here's what's going on. And I explained it to him, and he signed me off as though I had been in, so that I could get the money, because he knew it was. Yeah. And I think because he took that leap of faith in me, I was like, you know what, I don't want to let him down in some ways. I get that. And I then auditioned for the school play with one of my good buddies. And
what play was that?
It was Guys and Dolls, right?
Guys and Dolls.
And
not heard of that one.
It's this musical. It's actually on at the Bridge Theatre at the moment.
Oh, really?
I went to go and see it. It was so funny to come back and see something that meant so much to me at that time.
You got that personal connection with it.
Yeah, because what happened was I auditioned for it thinking, right, they're going to make me tree number 3. They're going to plonk me somewhere in the corner, ticked off, I'm back in the team. Yeah. But they didn't. What they did was they made me the main part. Wow. And we had a year who were full of very talented, like musical theatre. They had been to musical theatre primary schools and all of this, arts ed, all of these, great singers, great performers. So I was like, well, that's the lead cast done. So we're going to get one of the little side parts, easy, one rehearsal, come in, do it, whatever. But it wasn't. They gave me the main part, or one of 4 main parts. And it was the first time I had to like apply myself, learn my lines. I was being very creative. There was probably also an element, the guy that I got cast as, Nathan Detroit, was very cheeky. He's a very cheeky chappy, very kind
of played into your kind of personality quite well.
Yeah, and I got to then, what I learned through acting then was I got to convey emotions, but not as myself. So I would then be another character that could be sad. or I could be another character that was melancholic, or I could be another character that was, I could play all these different parts, but it wasn't me.
Was it like escapism in some ways?
I think so.
Yourself? Yeah.
But I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah.
And so naturally that sort of progressed, and my love for it, my love for not necessarily just the performing, but the preparation, the studying, the creating of something, presenting it to people, seeing the reward when people say, wow, that was really good, Danny, and giving me that affirmation. I was like, wow, I really like this feeling that I'm getting. So for A levels, we did this devised piece, and one of the girls' parents worked at Sky, I think it was. So they gave us some funding to go to the Edinburgh Festival. So we went and did a show at the Edinburgh Festival. It was terrible, but it was fun. Yeah. And then from there, the teachers helped me. They said, you've got something here. There's a talent here, and you should pursue it. And so they helped me and guided me into applying for drama school. And I got in. I did all my auditions. I got a few options, and then I decided to go to Manchester, but Manchester School of Theatre, and I loved it up there. I made some of my best friends. But what was really important about all of that is I got to move away from the chaos. I got to distance myself from it. And although it was very much on the phone and I was still the next of kin and I would still be getting all of these calls, I could set boundaries. So mum just couldn't come into my room with all that chaos. She wanted to. I had my own space. I had my own life. I was in halls. And
I mean, how was that like? Did you feel like you had a bit of a break from it in some ways, from being in the chaos of the home and kind of your family home to obviously moving out and being in Manchester?
To some degree, yeah. But what then happened was there were elements of guilt, because I felt I've left my sisters. They're still back home. They're still dealing with this. Yeah. So financially, I was trying to support them, and emotionally to some extent. But I needed to cut ties a little bit. I needed to go and have a bit of a fresh start for me. I needed to go and launch a bit of a new life, because it was taking its toll. But I didn't know that at the time.
Okay.
And obviously when you're at university, or sort of when I was at university, Freshers Week, it turns into Freshers Month. There's a lot of alcohol consumption. Your whole 1, 2, 3 years. I think the one thing that I had that kept the course was a very intensive course. Some university courses are 16 hours a week. Ours was like 8, 9, 10 hours a day, then shows. Yeah. So it probably helped structure me a little bit, but it was still, you're going out, you're drinking, you're going to bars and clubs, and probably, unbeknownst to me again, is probably numbing and dampening a lot of the things that were going on and not processing,
all these emotions which have really happened. Yeah.
So I left university, was very lucky you do a showcase at the end. I got an agent in London. And
it's quite difficult to get an agent.
Yeah. I was very, very lucky, but I think partially, no, what I should be saying actually to myself is, no, Danny, you're good, and but what I was, there was I guess an element of the diversity aspect. I think I was like the only Asian guy in probably 2 years, or maybe even the 3 years. So
when you was there,
so anyone that came in that was what's now known as a global majority, but was an ethnic minority, or however you want to frame it, did kind of always get swept up, because out of 30 students in a year, if you've got one person of color, you stand out.
Yeah.
But I was very lucky. I got a few offers from different agencies, and I chose a particular agent, and work started to kick off almost immediately.
Was it quite? You kind of did it kind of kick off straight away in regards to obviously getting these jobs, and what was that first kind of moment where you was like, oh my God, I've just got this massive job and just come out?
Yeah, I think I might have actually still been at uni when I got my first job. I was still at uni, and I think the first job was like an ITV thing with Saran Jones. I think it was called Unforgiven or something like that. It was just a little small part, couple of lines, but I think I was still at uni when that was. So it even started before I'd finished. And then, things picked up. I did a play at the Dry School Theatre, which was about the Western involvement in Afghanistan. That got nominated for an Olivier. Wow. We then took it all over America.
So you travelled around America?
So I was all around America with this show, for about a year. Well, it feels like it went on forever, like 2 or 3 years, but it was a really good grounding into learning my craft in the
I was going to say, with everything what happened in these, like your upbringing, like tapping into do you tap into them emotions, do you think, sometimes when you got to play a certain part or kind of play a certain emotion?
Yeah, certainly in that production, I think I played 9 different characters over 6 or 7 plays.
Yeah.
And, it was about war and it was about loss and grief and loads of things. So I was very able to tap into all of that. But again, not as myself, as these characters. So really, really enjoyed that. Came back, and then I can't remember which order they all happened in, but a series of TV shows, one of which I went to go and film in Canada for
Was that Primeval?
Primeval, yeah. So I was out there for about 8 or 9 months, I think. And
how was that experience like being in Canada? I mean, you must be quite young as well.
Yeah, I was fairly young, and it was wild. I was so lucky to get that part, and I was so grateful to get that part. And financially, it set me up quite well for a while, and I was able to, as a result, buy a flat from that job in West London.
Yeah.
I bought a flat near Mum so I could support her, but not have to be living in the place
That's
with
amazing,
her. So I just literally went.
You've been able to just put like a deposit down when you get back.
And I'm so lucky with that. But I knew that when I came back from uni, I came back from uni and then I was kind of off into the shows. But I knew at some point I'd have to land back in London, and where I stood was I would have to be moving back in with Mum. She had the space for me, but I was like, I cannot go back there. I just can't live in that space. Not good for my mental health.
Yeah.
So now I'm starting to become aware of my mental health.
How was your mental health then when you was doing all these acting gigs? Was the acting, like you say, was you so focused on the acting that you kind of holding back or kind of holding these emotions?
Distraction. Yeah. It was distraction. So I was not addressing any of the trauma that I had been through, emotional abuse.
When did that hit you then? When was that moment where... Because sometimes it can just hit you in one go and it just comes out of nowhere. Like.
Well, I guess, okay, so I guess, I've mimicked what happened with Mum. Low level trauma to some degree. In fact, I don't want to diminish it for others, but for me, it was what I experienced. And then I had that event or sequence of events. And that sequence of events in the space of about 3 months was Dad passing away, the knock-on effect on Mum, which was lots of she was not in a good place.
Yeah.
I fell off my little Vespa on the way to a job at the BBC, so I broke my foot. So now I got physical trauma as well. I'm in a cast for 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. And you lost that job as well.
Lost that job, yeah. In fact, they tried to.
They always say it comes in threes as well, don't they?
It's funny you say that. So I've got Dad passes away, knock-on impact to Mum. I've got breaking my foot. And I've got, and as a result, I was just pushing everyone away. And at the time I had a girlfriend who was really good to me, but I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. So I'd push away the only things that were close to me. And at that time it was a girlfriend who was very, very supportive. So as I've pushed her away, I'm now more and more by myself. I'm at this lovely flat in West London, sitting by myself alone with a broken foot. And that is when the thoughts started to happen. That is when I started to just get really low. I got now a physical injury, all the trauma and the things that I've experienced. I'm feeling loss and regret because I've lost my partner. I'm feeling Mum's not in a good place. I'm not working. I can't work.
Was there anyone you could reach out to at that time, or like any kind of guy friends, or even like female friends? Anyone you could
I had a lot of friends, and I was quite not in an arrogant, but I was quite a popular person. I love people. I love friends. I always try
being around,
people.
socializing.
But I didn't think at the time. I was just like, I don't want to burden anyone, and I was just thinking, I'm just not in a great place, and I need to. This too shall pass, But it didn't, and I got worse and worse and worse.
How many weeks was it like? Because imagine like we've all been through this patch where like stuff happens and you go through like this kind of dark patch. Like how many weeks in or months in when you're like, I still feel like this and I can't kind of shift this emotion?
It wasn't a thing of weeks or months. I started to research methods to take my own life, and it got to a very serious point. First of all, it was just pure curiosity. Like, you're hearing these words, depression. I've heard it from my mum. I've heard, probably attempted suicide or attempts on your life became quite normalized because Mum was at some point once a month. And I'd be hearing these words from the doctors, it's this, it's that, or, you know, so it became very normal for me.
So it didn't feel like a big thing in
feel
some
like
ways
it just
because you've
felt
been brought up around that word. Yeah.
And so I feel like I was very desensitized to it. And what it culminated in, I was getting worse and worse and worse, but not sort of realizing. And my cast was set to get taken off. And at that point, all of my mates said, "Oh, cast off, come and meet us. Let's go for some drinks. We're going for some drinks. We're going out in Clapham." Brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's probably the worst idea to come away from. I hadn't been drinking by myself in the flat. It wasn't something that I ever did by myself. It was always a social thing. So I've gone from not drinking. I've had all this trauma. I haven't processed anything that's going on. I go for this big night out.
Lots of alcohol.
Of alcohol. And I get into a really bad place. And at the end of the night, what was now known as an adjustment trauma, but I was in the space where I wanted to take my own life, and I left my friends and I said goodbye to them. And they had no idea.
No idea.
They thought I'm just going for an early night back home. They had no idea. And I left.
Even that night, you seemed normal to them.
Yeah, I was putting on the
brave
mark,
face,
you know. And there is something that I've learned subsequently that usually those individuals that have taken their own lives, the lasting memory is usually a very smiley, positive one, because the person wants to, and I know this was the thing for me, they want to leave a positive memory when they know they're going to go. So
I never thought about it.
So you always, you know, it's always see you tomorrow then, or it's like people have no idea. Well, not always, but there are a lot of the times people are like, he just said goodbye to the kids and went off to work.
Right.
No idea.
Because I had a friend of a friend, can't say the name, but she went out with like a group of girls. They're all together. One of the group of girls, like it happens to any group, like just goes missing, like just like disappears, and like, oh, maybe she's too drunk, or maybe she's had enough. It's quite late on in the night anyway.
Yeah.
And then they're coming back, and there's like commotion around the tube, but they don't think anything of it. So they get an Uber instead, and then find out the next day, like this girl like jumps in front of the tube at the end of the night, and like it's mad, isn't it? Because like they wasn't aware, they was having a great time with her, like, and like you say, like no signs of distress or anything, like.
And there's a whole big thing around alcohol and what it does. You know, in a way, it can subdue the stresses. It makes you forget. It numbs you, I guess, in some ways. But it also numbs you to what is risky. And, you know, I don't think if I was completely sober that night, that sequence of events would have happened. No chance. No chance. So that's why you've got to be very mindful of alcohol when you're not in a good place. And now if I do go out and have a drink with friends, I'm very conscious. I'm very mindful of how am I feeling. I know that I'm well beyond that place now, but I don't drink when I'm in a bad place or I'm stressed or things are, but I only drink to go and have a beer when things are good, when the sun is shining and I feel good. If there's any wavering at all in my mood, feelings, emotions, thoughts, behaviors, anything, I will not drink. I'll go out and I'll sit and have a soft drink.
What was your kind of friends' reaction when they did they ever find out straight away?
Yeah, I had to make a few calls. My uncle then turned up, at the hospital, and was just like, he couldn't, but it was just a lot of disbelief. And then my good friends turned up at the flat, and like, I saw they were guys, and the guys started crying, and they were like, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you come to us? And at that point I was like, why didn't I go to you? Like, I just didn't want to burden anyone. I just wanted to like, Let's
get that headspace. You must feel like you're on your own, aren't you? Like this, knowing. I mean, what was kind of that journey after that? Like, where do you go for support? Like, what kind of treatment do you get? Like, how do you kind of start that kind of rehabilitation? Well,
the first thing was my uncle was like, we're throwing everything at getting you better, which he would have done before that anyway, had he have known, but he didn't know. So I'm trying various therapy, I'm trying hypnotherapy, all sorts, you name it, I've probably tried it. And I went through a whole bunch of different treatments. I chose for myself to not start with any medication. And that was purely my decision. I'm not for or against. But I had seen the journey that mum had with various medication. And I was like, there has to be another way to get better. And I want to rely on myself and my ability and my innate ability to get strong and to adjust what was not quite working internally. So I took a period of time to get back on my own 2 feet, to understand myself, my mind, what had happened, why it had happened, where those thoughts had come from, to better understand mental health in general, mum's situation, the knock-on effect to mine. And at the end of that, I then thought, you know what, I've studied and learned so much, which was initially a therapeutic base, which was trying to be a better listener. So counseling studies to be a better support for mum. Then I realized that actually I didn't want to spend a lot more time in that space, because counseling, or for counselors, it can be quite heavy. So you sit and you take on a lot.
And bringing that home as well.
You bring that home. And I wasn't even sure if I was ready to, if I was fully out the gate to be able to kind of take on all of that stuff. So the therapy moved into coaching, because coaching for me at the time was more solution focused, and it didn't have to always be about mental health.
Yeah.
Where you come, it might be, I want to get a promotion, or you come with a task. So I then moved into coaching. And then I wanted to academically go a little bit further and to understand the mind more. And so I began a master's in positive psychology, applied psychology, where I could then take the research and the theory behind it all, but also the lived experience, and combine that.
What works well for you then? Like, when you was at that point where he's going to commit suicide, like, what was that treatment for you which helps you? Was it CBT or was it talking?
I had some CBT, which was really good. I had lots of different practitioners. But one of the ones that I really remember was the cognitive behavioral therapist saying to me, okay, and I was talking about the breakup and how sad it had made me. I felt it was my fault, and that, you know, I had hurt someone that I deeply cared about. And there was this big whiteboard, and she said to me, okay, draw on this board what that takes up for you, what that as an image. And I drew this kind of black puddle, like the sadness. She was like, okay, and draw these other components. What else have you got? You've got your uncle who loves you. You've got friends. You've got this. And I started to draw all of these pictures. And for the first time, I sort of stepped back and I was like, wow, I was so engrossed and immersed in that small dark patch. I didn't see anything else outside it. But being able to draw it and step back and look at it objectively, I was able to be like, you've got so much, 9 things that are going well in your life. Work's going well. You've managed to buy a flat. Your sisters are healthy. Like, I wasn't seeing any of that. I was just
so fixated on
I was consumed by the one thing that was overwhelming me, and it was, why did I make the biggest mistake of my life? Did I hurt someone that didn't deserve to be hurt? All of that kind of stuff. So I took time to get better myself. To increase that self-awareness, and then to then begin to study and take my experience. I was also being asked by certain charities to go, because of my acting experience, to go and be a mental health speaker. For various
all this
charities.
Experiences then kind of led to kind of the work you do now. The life coaching.
The path has just kind of unfolded, and I'm still auditioning and I'm still doing the acting stuff. But what I've realized is my real passion lies with helping and supporting people. And I believe a lot in this life in service to others, you know, is very fulfilling. And that's what I've experienced in my journey. And so now I see the acting as kind of like a hobby. The auditions come in, I create the audition tapes, I send them off, and if a job comes in, brilliant, I'll go and do that. And if it doesn't,
you're not fully supporting on that now, so which is great. You've kind of got your life coaching, and imagine you'd be quite stressed out as well if you if it was just one thing, now you've got other things going.
And it's a really, acting there's a whole world to explore in acting and psychology and what that does to people. And I know that there were quite a few guys that left who did attempt to take their own lives in the probably 2 subsequent years after drama school.
You found out that
after because
isn't that mad?
It's really, really interesting, and something that I might do as like a dissertation piece in my master's. Because
why do you think it's people within kind of the musical theatre, like acting?
You go to a place where you are deconstructed in some ways. Okay, you learn to you take apart your identity a little bit so that you can be malleable, so you can become different people and different characters. And so you sort of unmask, and all of these things come out at university. And what I mean by that is a lot of your emotions come up, things come up in performances. You know, someone bursts out into tears in rehearsal, you realize because it's from a trauma that she experienced 3 or 4 years ago. A lot of stuff comes up because you're dealing with it, deep emotions. If you're really connecting with the character, you're not crying on a level that's up here. You're crying from your,
and it probably brings up emotions you've completely forgot about as well,
or never even experienced.
Yeah, on different levels,
like, that you've contained and not processed. So that's a really interesting space. And I think you then leave drama school. You've worked really hard for 3 years. And you're a good actor. Like it wasn't even a meritocracy. The best actors didn't all get agents. It was, do you have a face that fits the gap that we need?
Yeah.
So you imagine that. So then people have graduated, they've come out, they're thinking, right, I haven't got an agent. I've worked 3 years to get an agent, ultimately to get me to as my window to work. That hasn't happened. And then you've got this, I don't know, this societal expectation on maybe men, or perhaps then it was, that, you know, to be the provider, to support their partners. And I think that we were training in the North, and, you know, the Northern kind of bravado of you know, I'm the, you know, and I think a lot of guys struggled with that. I think a lot of guys were then, okay, you need to go and take that job in that bar. Okay, so you're now a graduate with a BA, and you're coming out and it's like, take that bar job. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you're then thinking, okay, this bar job is a means to an end. But what happens when you're in that bar job now for another 2 years?
Out of it,
really hard, really hard. And so I think a lot of people struggled with that. And then, you know, if they've met a partner and then they've had a kid, the responsibility is no longer just you. You're to some degree, you've got to provide, and you've got another mouth to feed and someone to support. It's a lot of pressure. So yeah, I think a lot of people did struggle. I wasn't the only one. I was, you know.
Did it surprise you when you found out 2 other people went through a similar experience? Yeah, so one of the things that happened, so a very dear friend of mine at university is a guy called Johnny Benjamin. Johnny Benjamin, one of my best friends still, lovely, lovely guy. He made a documentary called Stranger on the Bridge. It's a Channel 4 documentary about him attempting to take his life, and a stranger coming up to him on the bridge and talking him down and showing him compassion and reassuring him that things would be okay. And they became really good mates and campaigners. And I remember seeing that documentary and I was like, Johnny, like, what happened to you, mate? Like, I went through a similar, like, I had no idea. Like, he had his own battles he was dealing with his sexuality. He came out as gay later on. He came from a Jewish family who are all so loving and supportive, but his internal thing was, I can't tell anyone, this is shame on the family. So he was dealing with his own stuff. And that's where it led him. And so he became a big, it still is a big campaigner for mental health. He does a lot of stuff with kids now, actually. And I remember, so I was living with him at the time, and he had a talk to go to. And he said, Danny, I don't feel up to it at the moment. Would you mind coming with me to this talk that I've got to deliver? And I said, yeah, no problem. Listen, I'm not doing anything today. So we got a taxi to this talk, and it was at his brother's company. And at the end, they just said, hey, do you want to share a couple of words of your experience as friends and like 2 men at university together? Yeah, what you've been through and everything.
And I was like, sure, if you want me to. And it sort of became a bit of a Q&A. And at the end of it, they said, wow, this is so powerful. You 2 guys as best friends going through all of this experience, not knowing what each other were going through. You're in a group of 30 people at drama school. It's tight. You should kind of know what's going on with each other. And so people kept saying to us, that's really powerful, that's really moving. You should think about going together and delivering some of these talks together. So Johnny then said to me, do you want to come and do more stuff with me? And I said, you know what, if it helps people and we can share our experiences as 2 young men that didn't feel comfortable sharing their experience, then why not?
It must feel so like fulfilling now. I mean, that obviously one of the main reasons why you do it, help people, but it must be so fulfilling when you feel like you've actually touched or like changed people's lives.
Yeah, you know, I asked Mum. There was a point that there was a documentary going to be made about my experience of mums, and And I said to her, Mum, are you comfortable with this? Like, I want to share some of our story and our journey. And I remember her saying, look, if everything that we've been through can help other people, then it's worth it, even if it helps one person. And that was really powerful. And it's our story and our journey has helped much more than one person. And it's sort of, for me, it makes everything that we've experienced worthwhile. Everything, all the trauma that Mum has experienced, all the trauma that myself and my sisters, my family have experienced, has all found some meaning.
It means something now, you know what I mean? Like now you're helping other people with all these, obviously like what you went through was like so much, but obviously now you've learned from that, and you can take that and you can kind of help other people. Where do you see yourself going in the next kind of couple of years with life coaching and helping people?
So the life coaching business is up and it's set up, and I'm really enjoying the work there. There's individual coaching. I'm doing a lot of work with organizations at the moment. One day of the week is my sort of charitable arm day, which is we'll go to schools or organizations, places that don't have very much funding, and that's my giving back. But this, the masters that I'm doing in positive psychology, applied positive psychology and coaching psychology is now on a much deeper academic level, where I'm looking at wider systemic change. So where I was initially going and dealing one-to-one, you're a male, you're dealing with poor mental health because of X, Y, and Z, and we do coaching. I'm now looking at wider structures as to how we look as a society at mental health and well-being, and how much of what we've known historically has been based in what's known as a deficit-based model. There is a problem, we treat it. Someone comes in with symptoms of depression, we treat it, there's medication or there's therapy. Do you
think people's kind of upbringing and kind of environment when they're brought up young plays a massive part in their mental health later on in life?
Yes, it definitely does. However, that's not to say that someone that has experienced trauma, where there's a lot of research and studies to show now that those that did experience difficult or traumatic upbringing sometimes become the most successful, because they had the resilience had to be built early. They had to overcome challenges. So there is a lot of academia.
Listen to the Russell Brand interview on the Diary of the CEO, and he kind of touched upon kind of the upbringing, how really successful people, they go through a lot of trauma and they kind of use that to kind of spur them on in some ways.
And that's a lot of the study that I'm doing at the moment. We want to acknowledge that individuals have experienced trauma. It's not forgetting, but there are ways to try and frame that to positively impact your future. And I've learned that firsthand. I could certainly look at my experiences and sit there and be like, this happened, and languish. And that doesn't help me. What helps me is trying to understand, okay, that is the past. I cannot change it. I can become aware of my present and how my mood and affect my feelings now. And hopefully that will inform my future. But there's stuff in the past that I cannot change. So how am I going to look at it? And I think that is the whole spectrum of this positive psychology movement. The 3 points of psychology were initially to treat mental illness, to support the ordinary day people, so in today, and to study geniuses. That was what psychology was set up to do. But after World War II, it all shifted completely. And because there was so much trauma from the war, all of psychology's efforts moved towards the deficit model, treating trauma. Okay. And actually what we started to neglect was supporting the modern day and also looking at studying geniuses. And what studying geniuses means is not literal geniuses, although they were included as well, but looking at what's going well within society, what organizations and individuals are flourishing, how are they? There's so much positive news that does get released, but what we're shown all the time is the negative news. So the youngest person to ever do all of their maths GCSEs and get A stars in all of them, or whatever those metrics were. What that point of psychology was supposed to do was, what were the environments that supported this young child to make them achieve thrive? That? And that I find so fascinating. And the model that we have at the moment is not really sustainable. We can't keep just everybody gets really sick and stressed and burnt out, and then we treat it with therapy. It's not a sustainable model. What we need to be doing is trying to really set, okay, what's working well? How do we emulate that? Who are those people? That's not to say there's not a space for therapy and all that, but everything about mental health really at the moment is about mental ill health. it is not about flourishing in a competency-based model, which is on the other side of the spectrum, which no one hears anything about. You know, being in flow, flourishing, positive emotion, positive affect. None of these things are even probably people have heard of, but they are important parts to our growth and our development. So I'm really interested in broadening that continuum again and bringing awareness to that now. So it's taking a new shape and an exciting shape, and there's lots of theory and research behind it.
It's incredible how you're kind of adapting, and you're learning more and you do more courses, and it kind of, it's great to see, and it's super exciting. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Danny.
Thank you for having me.
Honestly, it was so easy to organise, get you down. Like with some guests, I'm like chasing them like every week but honestly, no, it's a pleasure, and like I'm really grateful that you come down straight away and we got the opportunity to have you on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks.
If anyone wants to kind of follow you on kind of your Instagram and social channels,
Instagram is Danny Rahim Official. I think it is now. Someone cloned my account. So Danny Rahim Official. And what else? LinkedIn, Danny Rahim. I mean, it's a unique name. So you put me in somewhere, you're going to find me. And Danny Rahim Coaching is where all the coaching and that side of things takes place.
No, it's amazing, Danny. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And
thank you.
If you guys enjoy it, make sure to click subscribe and click that like button if it's on YouTube. wherever you're watching it, subscribe and keep listening. All right, see you later.